Final Fantasy VII Remake. Let's be honest, when this thing was first announced, most of us didn't think it would happen. One of the most beloved franchises, most adored games, remade into today's graphics. Say it ain't so. And many times it actually felt like it wasn't going to be. Weird delays, rumors of mismanagement, and issues with production abounded. But here we are, one step closer to the final thing. As most of the world found out this morning, Square loaded up the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo on 2 servers and let gamers jump into the first 40 to 50 minutes of the game. Just a brief taste of the story, just a smidge of the combat, and just the tip of the iceberg in a game that Square is remaking and saying is going to be so awesome that it can't be contained in one game, it has to be in multiple parts. How did it turn out? Well, let's check it and see. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. Let's discuss graphics first. Now, it's crazy to think that we are playing this game finally. This is what the game looked like in most of our memories, each one of us, those early imaginings that we had, where we always used to think that things were better than they were, especially years ago. You thought your car looked cooler, you looked cooler, and Final Fantasy VII looked cooler than it really was. But here, finally, we get the game updated to today's graphics. Everything is running in beautiful particle effect bathed glory, with light rippling off the edges of impossibly huge swords and bathing the world in the heat of fire spells. This is a weird thing to experience for a moment. It is like taking a step into the Wayback Machine and looking and going, I was right. From the animation to the enemy designs to the particle effects to the lighting, the game really does look incredible, even if it's a little bit busy for me. Like someone found the particle emitter button in their favorite graphics engine, made one and thought, damn, this looks good, made 50 more, passed it on to the next guy, and they thought 50, that's like 1 to me, and started it all over again. Regardless of that though, from the animation to the special abilities to the quick cuts of the enemy's unique attacks, there's a visual language that's both eminently familiar to Final Fantasy VII fans, but also wholly new to both newcomers and old gamers alike. And there's very few games out there that can bridge a gap like this. It really does appear like Final Fantasy VII Remake may be that title. Currently, the game runs at about 30 FPS, though it does drop a bit during the bigger battles. However, that doesn't mean everything's perfect. There are a couple issues here, and one of the major ones is that camera. The camera, especially in those moments when you're hot and heavy in the middle of battle and you're swinging that giant sword around, can get really clumsy with the game's camera going between wall and floor, wall, floor, behind the character, into the enemy, floor, wall, floor, ceiling. It can really end up causing a detrimental effect when you're in the midst of battle. But I really do hope they end up fixing that, especially because we do know that there are more contained areas in the farther parts of the game, so this isn't something that's going to be absolutely alien. When it comes down to it, though, what we do have is a game that feels like you've stepped into the past, and for once, your past is just as cool as you remember. And speaking of cool, let's talk about music for a second. This is how all music could sound if every arrangement was written while you were listening to Burgess Meredith give Rocky a pep talk before a fight. Complex arrangements, excellent handling of the subtle different layers of all the parts of the orchestra. There's nothing clumsy and nothing too forced in all of the music that is here. It's epic. It is a bit over the top at times, but it's certainly fully and completely solidified as Final Fantasy VII style music. And for fans, it's going to absolutely nail it. For newcomers, it can appear a bit heavy-handed, but I personally liked it. However, one thing that was a little bit shady to me was the voices. There's a lot of elements I like here, but I do have to say it was a little bit clumsy in its writing. There are a lot of times where the different ways in which everybody talks feel stunted and short and cut off a bit. While this is something that when the original game came out might have passed muster, I think now when you look at other titles and how they're written and how they're executed, it does come off relatively basic when you compare it to other titles at this current time frame, but we'll have to see how it all comes together later on. Regardless of that, there was nothing here that was really bad, and most of it was actually good, so we'll just have to see. Now, the sound effects in this game are very well done, and one of the things that's added here is that 3D effect, because you are in a 3D game now and not that older style that we were in the original game, meaning there are times where you're in the midst of battle, and it actually can help you decide sort of what you're going to do by hearing where the different weapons are going off, especially with that main boss at the very end who's launching weapons a lot of times, and sometimes just due to the way that the camera works, you might find it difficult at times to exactly tell where the enemies are hitting. This is very cool. It really does help. And I dig the sound. I think they did a really good job, especially with the over-the-top sounds of some of these weapons and special abilities. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. You play as Cloud Strife, a brand new member in a mercenary unit that has taken the fight to evil. And you pretty much look like the 7th member of a K-pop band who tore the rear end of an old Chevy, sharpened it, and then called it a sword. Your team's mission is to infiltrate the power company to destroy the Mako reactor, Mako being the lifeblood of the world. The basic premise is pretty simple. Be as stealthy as you can for like 5 minutes, then get caught and proceed to whittle down the enemy forces with special moves, magic attacks, and every trick of the trade your little team can muster. And right from the start, you're alerted to some of the changes. This is now a real-time attack game. It's an action game. You can still, of course, slow it down, and you can, of course, play it in different difficulty modes that do somewhat of a turn-based style, but it's really all based around this new action gameplay combat, and it works fairly well. The square button ends up doing your basic power moves. You have the triangle button, which can switch or do your specials, and you have moves to dodge and block. And by dodging and blocking and blasting and bashing your enemies, you end up building your gauges so you can pull off special moves. Like Barrett's ability to heal others, or his ability to overcharge his hand cannon, or your ability to leap up in the air and turn into a flying Ginsu and chop an enemy in half, or slash forward, quick fencer style, and take out any of your enemies. When it comes to combat, it is decidedly simple compared to a lot of other action games. You lock on with your right thumbstick, and then you can flick between enemies at any time that you basically want to. You can also switch with Cloud to your different stance, which is a power stance in the middle of some of those combos. Your entire job is to, well, kill the enemy as quickly as possible. For example, Barrett can shoot turrets and flying enemies where it's a little harder for Cloud to get up to them at various different times. So it makes sense to switch over to Barrett and play him for a moment and have him take out enemies. Now, at any time you can sort of slow down the game. It's not a complete pause. It's sort of a slow motion pause. You can still see enemies moving, and you can give them actions at any time. There is no gambit system here that's running, and there isn't, as of this time, any kind of AI for your other characters running other than attacking that I can actually see. Maybe those come at a later time. But what really matters is the control, especially because we're moving from that turn-based attack system. And how does that work? It works very well. I was actually incredibly surprised just how well, despite those camera issues I mentioned earlier, the combat system works. And you have to get sort of accustomed to some odd hitboxes, especially on that last boss. But against the normal characters, it's not hard at all to pretty much take them out regardless of what's going on. I think this worked out quite well. It's very easy to play. It was easy to move around, pick out who I wanted to use and who I wanted to play with, and at any time you could pause. Now, by about that time, you are at the main boss of the game, which is a Scorpion Sentinel. It's a giant robotic boss, and he's actually a pretty good skill cap to what you've learned throughout the rest of the game. All of those little things you've learned, how to flick from different enemy to enemy and build those combos up and use those special moves, come to fruition against him. He's not incredibly hard, but he is actually a meat soak. He is definitely a character that has a lot of hit points, and you'll be bashing away at him for a while. And he has a lot of different defensive measures that we'll take into account. A lot of different cutscenes where he moves around the game world. This is really a cinematic style game mixed with the action, and it's something different. You can tell that they still took that cinematic feel of Final Fantasy VII, but they wanted it within the action moments itself. Works here in this short demo. Now, will it work as well when you're 8, 10, 15 hours into it, or will it grind away at you? I don't quite know, but I have no issue with the way it played out here. I think everything actually worked. The way the characters controlled was very simple. It's got one of the easiest HUDs you could possibly imagine when it comes to understanding where all the data is. I will say that the game world, while it looked good, was basic in a lot of places that I was surprised to actually see in some of these overarching factory locations. I was expecting a little bit more debris and just a lived-in feel. Overall, what do we get? Well, we get a short demo. It's about 8 gigs, and we get one that does show us that what they've been working on seems to, at least here, be working just fine and be a good way in which they can bring Final Fantasy VII into the future. We'll just have to see if over 30 hours it's still enjoyable, it's still fun, but it feels like it will be, especially as you move those different characters in and out of your party and you have those different idiosyncrasies of all of them working together. They nailed the control, which I think is one of the biggest parts of the game. That camera, though, gotta admit, that will bring me a moment of pause depending on just how difficult the game is later on. That's it for me. That's what I thought of the demo itself. Quite enjoyed it, was really surprised by it, really impressed by it, and feel like they have brought this somewhat into the future. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Please leave a comment in the comments section on what you guys think of the demo after you've played it. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike it, give it a thumbs down. Check out Reddit and Twitter and Facebook, and you can always become a patron on the Patreon website. That helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap and cover as many games as possible. And you guys know I buy a copy of every game I review. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.